Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. How is everybody doing? Let's talk about the biography on Randy Orton. So, it was very good. I think it was better than the WWE documentary that they did called, I think it's called Evolution of a Predator or something to that effect. It went into a little bit more detail than I think that documentary did. I haven't seen it in a long time. I didn't know Randy Orton was going to be the first documentary, or else I probably would have watched that and then watched this and compared the two. But Randy Orton's a new-ish legend, I guess you could say. And so doing his story has been told quite a few times. A lot of the footage that they have shown, the interviews of like Batista and a couple of other people, were stock footage, stuff that was probably in the can from a long time. I'm not sure if that was the same stuff from Evolution from a Predator. I'm pretty sure the Batista stuff wasn't. Sure the John Cena stuff wasn't, and the Edge stuff wasn't. But some of the angles and the directions that they went in is similar. So if you saw that documentary, this one is not that far off, with the exception that there was a lot more of his family. So you got to see his stepsons, got to talk to his new wife, that sort of thing. They went into a little bit more detail about his childhood, I think, than I think they did in the other one. I think they went into his childhood a little bit more. They certainly talked about his military career more in the A&E documentary. So I want to touch on those, a couple of things here and there. They talk about Matt Riddle, his back injury. Matt Riddle was treated very strangely, in so much as they didn't tell you who he was. I don't think, Matt Riddle's name was shown, but he was a WWE superstar clearly when this thing was created, but he of course doesn't work there anymore. But the story on Randy Orton is a pretty interesting story. He's I guess you could say the fallen angel, a fallen ace, where he was supposed to be the top guy, the face of the company, but due to his ego, due to his attitude, due to his behavior, a lot of the mistakes that he made, he ended up being cast mostly as the villain. He's still sort of the fun dad, quote unquote, of WWE, where, Randy doesn't take anything too seriously anymore. He's been chilling the last couple of years. But he was supposed to be the guy, and it never got there because of his outside the ring activities, whether it be drugs or bullying fans or bullying divas or whatever. It just never got to that point. He became one of the most popular guys, but he never became the guy, which is what Vince had envisioned for Randy Orton. And that's the story. The story is Randy Orton had all the natural gifts and the natural abilities to be the face of WWE, to be the Ultimate Warrior to John Cena's Hulk Hogan, but he never got there. And this is the reason why, And then you get into that Randy grew up insecure. He was always bullied. He was skinny. And then so he always had problems with authority. This brings us to the military. Now, in the military part is some interesting bits. Randy starts talking about the recruiter used to hang out near a grocery store and give the teenage boys liquor and beer and talk up the military as basically, you're going to be a cool guy in a uniform and chicks are going to love you. You're going to get the broads, you're going to get paid, yada, yada, yada. And that's why he signed up, because it sounded like it was going to be fun. And then he gets into it. And, boot camp is one of the things where he said he kind of coasted on that. He did it. He liked boot camp. He liked the structure. But then he went to the fleet and started seeing hazing. Now, this is not something that we've heard before. He's talking about guys being cattle prodded with electrical sockets and different things like this, and a guy getting wrapped in a blanket and sat on, and I don't know if it was a blanket or it was something, and the guy was completely wrapped up, and the guy's mom was on the phone listening to him cry and all this sort of stuff. And the military does have a history of that sort of thing. And this is the first WWE biography I've ever seen that had a disclaimer before it came on, basically saying like the news and the views expressed therein, that kind of thing. And this is Randy talking about his experience in the military, but he's never mentioned hazing before. Now, this is interesting because hazing is a really big issue in the military. In fact, hazing is a really big issue with, I guess you could say, male culture in general. It goes from good-natured ball busting to physical assaults. Sometimes, threats that go beyond mere physical assault. Some even into sexual assault. And, these things, it can get pretty bad. So I feel like him mentioning hazing for the first time is interesting. No doubt that they didn't start actually taking hazing in the military seriously until recently. I think they really just started tracking that stuff within the last few years. I'm pretty sure back then it was 99, 2000, 98, 99, 2000, something there in that. It wasn't a concern. Nobody was ever thinking that much about hazing in the military. I'm pretty sure it still happens, but all things will still happen. But it's all about the level of, does society really care? And now we become a society where we really care about things like people being hazed in the military. And it's an interesting piece of business because it's not something that we've heard before, even if it's not absolutely true, we know that hazing did occur, in that scenario. So even if he didn't see it, he probably still knows people who were hazed. Even if it didn't happen to him, he probably was still aware of people who were hazed. And hazing happened a lot in the business too. This would be a big issue with Randy Orton and Backstage. Not just his behavior with the fans, but his behavior with other people. But it's pretty consistent that Randy Orton was extremely selfish, extremely narcissistic, and basically was coasting. And that's kind of always been his personality, where he doesn't want to put in a lot of effort. The humorous thing about that is they actually have footage of him in OVW saying exactly that he really didn't care about wrestling. He's just there to get paid, which is, they caught it on audio. Like, they played the video of him saying it with the captions. So the cameras are everywhere in WWE. Like, they catch these guys saying and doing all sorts of things. And Randy basically just not giving a damn because he had such natural talent that he felt like he didn't have to put in A+ effort. You can get by with a B. And that's kind of been his entire career is, I'll do just enough to get by. So they talked about that, of course, a lot later when they talked about 2004, where they made him the world champion. He was, the young world champion and everything. And he's supposed to be the face of the company, but he wasn't ready. He's let the success get to his head. Santino, beautiful. I'm glad he was there because, a lot of people don't know that he was one of Randy's best friends. And Santino was basically talking about, Randy Orton's outside with dynamite, throwing sticks of dynamite. Cody Rhodes, of course, is telling the story of Randy Orton is yanking sinks out of the wall. There's video of Randy threatening to beat up random fans. Randy pushing people and shoving and yelling at journalists. There's, of course, stories that were not, of course, addressed in the biography of Randy Orton bullying writers or bullying the divas, or, Court Bauer, who runs MLW, claimed that Randy Orton used to whip his penis out at the writers and touch himself and then try to shake their hand to see if they would do it. And then say, oh, you want me to tell Vince that you won't shake my hand? Or that kind of thing. Or apparently he did something to one of the girls where he kicked the back seat of her chair or something and made her fall out of her chair. A bunch of other stuff too that, was just petty and really ugly. But that seemed to be his personality, is that he seemed to be a guy who, was willing to do the bare minimum to get through, but had sort of a nasty streak that ran through his life. And a lot of that was due to, drugs and alcohol He talked about his addictions to painkillers and somas and things like this. And, his love of the party led him to disrespect the Undertaker and his dad, which is, I think, another thing that was in here that I thought was very interesting. He talked about staying up all night before the day before the Hall of Fame, not writing or having any notes when it comes to a speech for his dad. So he went up there, winged it for 90 seconds, and then went back to his chair. And again, the cameras are always rolling on WWE. You see Randy Orton slouched in his chair where his eyes are slowly closing while his dad is on stage talking. And Randy is falling asleep during the Hall. Man, that's incredible. That's incredible. It was incredible. He got caught in the act of falling asleep during the Hall of Fame when his dad was talking. And he basically said that's his biggest regret, is not giving his dad his, full attention. And also, he missed rehearsal with The Undertaker, WrestleMania 21, because he was out partying all night and decided he was finally going to get some sleep and slept through the rehearsal. So he ended up missing it. And both Undertaker and, his dad didn't come down on him for these mistakes. He would have been a very young guy at the time. He'd have been like 24, 25, or 26, something like that. And they basically was like, okay, he's a young dude. We're going to give him a break. And that just emboldened Randy to be worse. And this is where, I say discipline is a very important thing. Holding people accountable for their behavior, extremely important, because things start to escalate. And, Randy is not really getting busted for drugs. He's not getting busted for being disrespectful. They de-pushed him. They took the world title from him. He still ended up in a huge feud with The Undertaker. So he wasn't completely and totally destroyed, but he was not fully held accountable for some of the behaviors that he had been doing up to that point. And, consequences finally showed up in 2006 when he had an accidental overdose and Vince finds out. So now he's getting a 60-day suspension. Technically it was not for failing a drug test. It was due to, I think, unprofessional conduct or something like that. When I looked it up, that's what it said. So this is where he is sent to rehab, which is to him his reality check, where he's finally learning about himself. And they decide that the root of his anger issues is not drug addiction, but it is narcissistic personality disorder and anger management issues. And so when they started working with him with that kind of starts to help him. Of course, it doesn't change his behavior because he's still a dickhead in 2007 and 2008 and 2009. And, but he changed a little bit. He changed, of course, in 2008. He has his first daughter. Things start to really change for him. But he's now starting to learn about who he is and how he fits into the business. And he's getting a little bit more comfortable with his position. And the fact that he has, spent that time in anger management and did these psych assessments, that's what they are. They didn't say they were psych assessments, but that's what they are. If you got diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, you were in a psych hospital. You were talking to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So Randy gives Santino some credit for being sort of his spiritual guide, his spiritual advisor, who told him, like, hey, we had all these guys that were in the locker room with us, like Lance Cade, like Test, and I believe another one was Sean O'Hare, who might have been a peer of Randy Orton's. And all of these guys are dead from, drug overdoses, and you don't want that for yourself. And Randy starts to sort of come around. And then his daughter is born in 2008, and he wanted to get clean for her. He wanted to do the best he could to make sure that she was good. Then, of course, he gets married again, and she makes him happy. So he's a little bit looser, but he was still in a lot of pain. And he was still struggling with pain. And then we find out that he had stenosis. This was a couple of years ago, 2010, I think, when he first had his first back injury. And he said he did an RKO on Wade Barrett on the roof of a car, injured his back. He walked around for 10 years with a bad back, basically just taking painkillers or whatever, in order to get through the matches or whatever. And then finally he couldn't do it anymore. RK Bro actually extended it longer than it normally would have, because he was in a tag team situation. He didn't have to do much. But eventually he had to go away, had to get this thing looked at. And this is where they find out that he's, had to have spinal surgery. Of course, he just returned from the spinal surgery and he's feeling better than ever. And this is where Edge kind of says that, he thinks that Randy is kind of ready to wind down. And even though he doesn't need to get back in the ring, kind of wants to do it to finish things on his own terms. And I can see that. And I do think that we're probably looking at the last days of Randy Orton. I don't think he'd probably be there another 2 years. He says, I'm going to be here for another 5 or 10. It's like, I don't think so. I don't think so. Anyway, it's also talked about Randy Orton going his growth from being the problem child in the locker room that was hanging out with guys like Ric Flair and guys like Triple H, and they had to keep tabs on them and keep track of them and everything, to him being the mentor, being the guy who was looking after other guys. And he was kind of Riddle's mentor, I guess you could say. And they showed some really nice footage of him and Riddle talking, especially like WrestleMania and stuff like that. It was fun. And I hadn't noticed it until Riddle said it. They have a lot in common in terms of being two guys who met and had a lot of success when they were young. Riddle, and of course in UFC. And Riddle was the problem child in the UFC who was getting busted for drugs and stuff like that. And he had issues with Dana White. And Randy, of course, got busted for drugs and things like that, had issues with Vince. And they both had been through ugly divorces. They had children from previous marriages, and now they were getting remarried and all this sort of stuff. So they had a lot of things in common. And I really had not considered that until they started talking about it. But that actually makes the team work a lot. No wonder they got along, and no wonder, they didn't like each other at first. Well, Randy didn't like Riddle because Riddle didn't shake his hand. Riddle was disrespectful. Didn't introduce himself. Guys kind of gave him the old homeboy nod, and Randy's like, what? Yikes, who is this guy? But as he got to know Riddle became one of his guys. So I thought that was very interesting too, as a personal element, that Randy had been through this. He had been in this system, but there's other people who are like Randy Orton who have, gotten into some trouble, and now they have to pull themselves out of it somehow. And now you have a guy like Randy who did get into a lot of trouble, to a degree, never achieved what the company wanted for him, even though he became a huge star and he's, very well known. His level of stardom is still not what they intended. They intended for Randy Orton to be where John Cena is. Instead, he ended up being sort of the Randy Savage to John Cena's Hulk Hogan, which is a great compliment, but it's still not the position that they had planned, because John Cena was the guy who they were going to get rid of him. And he ended up surpassing Randy Orton and Batista and all these guys, and they pretty much made it easy for him by just being incompetent douchebags and starting a bunch of trouble. Cena was pretty squeaky clean for the most part, and wasn't getting busted for roids, wasn't getting busted for drugs, wasn't getting busted being a bully backstage or whatever. Maybe he had an issue here and there with somebody, like a Ken Doane or Alex Riley, but it wasn't to the degree that Randy Orton was getting in trouble. Cena was always good with the fans. And you had Randy, who was doing sort of everything possible to get fired. Cena made it easy. The decision was easy. You got Randy Orton, who's a douchebag, and you got John Cena, who, at least on the surface, is pretty goddamn clean. You make the decision to go with Cena. Another reason why you would probably go with John Cena is the work ethic. Again, I said it earlier, Randy is the kind of guy that he only wants to do just enough to get through this match, to draw this house, and there's no need to go all out. Part of that would be injuries. Randy had a series of injuries, and that made him alter how he works. But Randy Orton, even before a lot of these injuries, was not a let's go full tilt 100% kind of guy. Knowing that if he could have had the best match of the night every single time, but he probably would have burned out a lot quicker too. You know, him getting sort of a reputation for sleepwalking through matches and sleepwalking through his performances and not really taking his stuff serious. I mean, there was an interview he did recently that he didn't start taking promos seriously until like 2020. Like, this is a guy who's been in the business 16 years already. And he's just now really learning the value of promos. Like, that's crazy, you know, but that's Randy Orton for you, you know. Also the military thing. I didn't know this until maybe a couple of weeks ago, but Randy Orton is supposed to be in one of those Marine movies, and some guy from the Marine Corps complained, and Randy ended up getting pulled from the movie because of him going AWOL and ended up in the brig and all this kind of stuff. They felt it was completely disrespectful for Randy Orton to be cast in a movie of being a Marine, even though he really finished boot camp, but he did go AWOL. So that kind of hurt him too, because he's sort of everything that WWE stands for, that Vince McMahon is looking for to represent the company, Randy Orton cannot do. You know, he's been a drug addict. He's been a bully. He went AWOL in the military. He's pushing around fans, threatening journalists. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with Randy Orton. And, you know, they got to the bottom of it, and he's a better person today. But it stands to reason that this is why Randy Orton never got to the point that Vince McMahon wanted him to get to. And I think this was a really great documentary, and I do think it's better than the WWE documentary Evolution of a Predator, I think it's called. But you should still watch that one too. But let me know what you guys thought, and I'll talk to you guys later.